We are in a series called Relationship Matters. And last week we started off by talking about this biblical truth found in the Gospel of John, that it is not our impact, it is not our accolades, it is not our moral stances on political issues that will leave the largest testimony that God is alive and that God is good and for our neighbors. Instead, what we started talking about was that the potency of our testimony as a church and individuals that are trying to follow Jesus will always be dependent upon our love for one another. This is how the Gospel of John says, the world will know you are my disciples. And that sounds good, all right, all puppies and rainbows, until we really get into the daily ups and downs of real, raw relationship. Now, if you're somebody that has tracked with one of our Mosaic churches for a while, in addition, you know that we are doing our absolute best to create a church family that exists for a multi-ethnic, multi-community, multicultural city, right? So we are going to have people in this church that is coming from different contexts, different cultures, different countries, which means it is not a question of whether or not conflict will come. It is a matter of when. Right? And this is good news. Conflict is actually good news because it is a necessity for meaningful relationships. It's a necessity, right? Love void of conflict is not the type of gospel love that should be at the center of the church. The deepest, the most meaningful love is a love that wades through and a love that forgives and extends mercy through conflict. This is what we see throughout the life and death and resurrection of Jesus. Conflict is necessary for a deep and meaningful and transformative love, which means that as a church community, as we start this new church, we need some very practical theology. We need a theological framework for how we do conflict with one another, which brings me to the maybe. Here's what I mean by this. Some of you know this. I have 6 children. You can only imagine how many requests I receive throughout the day from my kids, right? It is, can I get a snack? Can I play soccer? Can I go outside? Can I get on the Kindle? Can I get some ice cream? Can I get some ice cream? Can I get some ice cream? It's like after I say yes to 3, it means you can all have it. You don't have to ask me again. Can I get a drink? Can I go to the pool? It is on and on and on. And when my mind is actually too tired to answer or engaged in some meaningful conversation with my spouse or trying to work, I have learned to use the magical word that has become so frustrating to my children. That is maybe. I say maybe. I look at them, I'm like, maybe. Leave me alone for a while. And when I do this, what happens is hilarious because you see the concept of duality. I'm going to talk about this in a sec. The concept of duality that runs so deep in children's and adults' bones all of a sudden is smashed. They are left with this weird third thing that they don't know what to do with. Duality, the idea of duality, the concept of it, it runs deep in the human heart. Which means too often the world feels like we have a yes or no option, right? We have one of 2 options. And those options usually, if not always, oppose one another. Throughout your social media platforms, your Instagram feed, your Facebook page, regardless of what you often say and how you comment, you are quickly going to be labeled as one supporting the police or one who is supporting oppressed people groups and those that are affected by police brutality. We're either black lives or we're blue lives. We're either pro-China or we're pro-Taiwan. We're either pro-Ukraine or we're pro-Russia. We're either Yankees or Mets, right? You're either retaliatory or you're passive. We're either people who speak truth or we're people who speak love. And one of the negative things about duality, but one of the very real implications of allowing duality to shape our theology in our lives is that you are either going to be on my side or not. You're either going to be in or you're out, right or wrong. But the very essence of the gospel, and here's where we just got to stop and recognize it, the very essence of the gospel is that Jesus is both God and man at the same time. This is the crux of Christianity. And that diminishes the crippling concept of duality real quick and starts to show us a third way that is full of both grace and truth, as the Gospel John speaks of. And it says that anytime you can hold two things like this together and you can walk through life with them held together. And so what I want to do today is I quickly want to show you the third way of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. And much of the contextual commentary that you're going to hear from today, and I've taught on this before, probably every other year, so I'll teach on it. It comes from a theologian named Walter Wink. You'll see his picture up here. And it's going to feel very abstract. It's going to feel up here, and you're going to be like, Dan, I'm just trying to make sure I know how to navigate fights with my spouse. So this feels way up here. But I'm going to tell you, as you watch some of the most incredible prophetic leaders throughout our world, they lead with this third way that Walter Wink fleshes out. And so you'll see pictures up here of people like Martin Luther King Jr. was well acquainted with the third way. Or Reverend Barber, right? He's a reverend right now who is leading a lot of the civil rights movement. Or Sister Helen. Or this woman that many of you will recognize, Mother Teresa. Or this guy that some of you should be well accustomed to, a guy named Shane Claiborne, who's doing great work out there. Or this man, Desmond Tutu. Or this guy, Nelson Mandela. These are all people who actually understood the theology that I'm going to talk about today and actually fleshes it out in some very public ways for the sake of the city they find themselves in. And so Jesus launches into the most known, remembered, and recorded sermon that any rabbi or pastor or priest has ever given. The Sermon on the Mount. As he does, he speaks to hundreds of people, if not thousands, who have come because of the authority of this Jewish man and the way he started to talk to people. But as he teaches on this specific day, in this specific moment, he teaches a largely Jewish community that has been pushed down and systematically oppressed by the Roman Empire. In fact, commentators and theologians and historians would suggest that if Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, was drawing this type of large crowd with this type of critical mass, you can be assured that Roman guard and Roman soldiers would have been walking around during this teaching, making sure that a revolt wasn't being sparked. And so with this crowd of Jews longing to hear words of liberation and freedom, with this crowd of Jews wanting to live without fear and without uncertainty, wanting to rest confidently knowing that their kids weren't going to be killed or their wives weren't going to be raped, craving salvation, not just from their sin, but also from this empire. They have a Roman guard walking in and out of them, and Jesus courageously begins to change the game and introduce this new third way by saying, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek as well. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand your coat to them as well. If anybody forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." He begins this big old speech with, "You've heard it from Moses, an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But this is a new day and there is a new way. And so do not resist an evil person." Now, if you are a Jewish man sitting on the ground with Roman guards standing nearby, who is the evil person that Jesus is now referring to in your mind? Who is it? This isn't rhetorical, actually, answer. It's the Roman guard, right? It is the Roman guard. Resist now is a military word that means to take up arms. And so Jesus begins, "And do not retaliate." And as soon as you hear these words, the devil of duality begins to play. Because do not retaliate to us means passivity. It means we don't confront our parents for the pain they possibly have caused us. It means we continue to let that person that we've been dating manipulate us because bringing it up as a conflict is just going to cause too much of an issue. On a global scale, it means that we just watch more and more Ukrainians killed. But Jesus then continues, and as he does, he really destroys this duality. He says, if anybody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other as well. Now, I say it, and it sounds passive. But as Jesus is saying this in this cultural context, it is nothing less than electric. In this modern day Palestinian culture, here's how this all worked. You slap those who are less than you. Romans would slap Jews. Jews would slap Samaritans. It was the pecking order of society. And those below you would get slapped in a physical contact, in a physical conflict. You would only close your fist and punch somebody if they were actually worthy of a fight. they were worthy and you saw enough value in it, you would close your fist and punch them. And you would do all of that with your right hand. Your left was reserved for one thing and one thing alone, to go potty. This was the hands you were doing everything with in that cultural moment. And all this for the Jewish listeners is painting a wild scene. Because if you're turning your other cheek, it means something. If you are slapped on the right cheek and I turn to you my other as well, I have now actually left you with one of two options. Either one, you can close your hand now, your right hand, and hit me, affirming the dignity and value as I am now worthy of a fight. Or two, you can rethink why you did it in the first place and stop. I guess there's a third, like you can do some weird like T-Rex thing, but really it is two. You have two options. And so what Jesus is starting to do is very clear. He is not teaching Jews how to resist and retaliate, nor is he teaching them how to be passive. He is offering this very creative, electric third way, which does one of two things. It is poignantly truthful, exposing the evil that you do not see me in this moment as an image bearer of God. And yet at the same time, it is extending an undeserved chance. That's grace. It is truth. It is grace, a creative third way in the thick of conflict, tension, and even oppression. He continues to drive this point home, and he says, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. Again, this feels and sounds somewhat defeatist. Right? For somebody like me who longs for justice and equality, this sounds like Jesus is asking people to roll over and just get kicked. But at this point in time, as today, people would sue one another. And Jesus is saying, hey, oppressed Jewish people, if somebody in power has sued you and has taken everything they need, and they keep pushing to even taking your shirt off of your back, I want you now to turn to them and give them a coat as well. Well, many of you know this. What did they wear in this cultural moment? Two things, a shirt and a coat. If you took off both, you are now naked in the middle of a court session. So it's like a bad dream. In our culture, that would be amazingly embarrassing. But as you start to understand the Israelite culture and context, especially in the book of Genesis, you see this with Noah, it wasn't the one that was naked that would feel shame. Historically, it was always those that were viewing nakedness that would actually feel shame. And so again, Jesus is breaking down duality for people who feel trapped by it. How many are going to be killed in a revolt, and yet how many would be oppressed if they stay passive? And yet Jesus is giving them this third option, an option that says, you will acknowledge the dignity that you are stripping away from me, or at least you're trying to strip away from me. And two, you can stop if you want to. He's not teaching Jews to retaliate, nor is he telling them to be passive. He is offering this third way, which is poignantly truthful, exposing the evil, that you don't see me as an image bearer, made in the image of God, and at the same time is extending this undeserved chance, this grace. This is the third way of Jesus. Now Jesus has people leaning in, right? Now Jews are leaning in. Now Roman soldiers and guards would be leaning in as well. This is a bit of a groundbreaking teaching. This is the liberating way that these people have been waiting for. They had been stuck in the systems of the world, in the duality of the world. The world says you need to play by these systems, either black lives or blue lives, right? Whites either have to live with some state of self-loathing because of the sins of their fathers when it comes to racism, or in this weird defensive denial. That is what the systems of the world says. But Jesus is saying there's a new system. There is a new way to process through life that is full of both truth and grace. And so he just finishes off by saying, if anybody forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. So often what you would see is Roman soldiers, they were known to randomly take a Jewish man or woman or child and force them to carry the bulk of their equipment. An example of this would have been Simon of Cyrene, who was forced to carry Jesus' cross later on in the gospel account. But why carry a soldier's stuff a second mile? Does this not go to the opposite extreme by aiding and abetting the enemy? Walter Wink would say, no, not at all. He writes, the question here, as in the 2 previous instances, is how the oppressed can recover the initiative and assert their human dignity in a situation that cannot immediately be changed. The rules, he says, are Caesar's. But how one responds to the rules as gods, and Caesar has no power over that. Imagine then the soldier's surprise. He writes, in this situation, you'll see this on the screen, in this situation, the oppressed have once more seized the initiative. They've taken back the power of choice. They've thrown the soldier off balance by depriving him of the predictability of his victim's response. He's never dealt with such a problem before. Now he must make a decision for which nothing in his previous experience has prepared him. If he has enjoyed feeling superior to the vanquished, he will not enjoy it today. Jesus does not encourage Jews to walk a second mile in order to build up merit in heaven or to be pious or to kill the soldier with kindness. He is helping an oppressed people find a way to protest and neutralize an erroneous practice despised throughout the empire. He is not giving a non-political message of spiritual world transcendence. He is formulating a worldly spirituality in which the people at the bottom of society or under the thumb of imperial power learn to recover their humanity. Jesus is going, there's no duality this time. You will not be passive. You will not retaliate. You will speak truth and grace. This is how the kingdom comes. Now, just to turn a corner here, a theology like this has to shape our philosophy for living on a day-to-day basis. Has to. Especially when there is so much oppression and fear and uncertainty and emotional unhealth. We're getting into conflict every day with people, just in part because many of us are burnt out by the last 3 years. We're quick to snap at folks. And so how do we move from a theology that's up here to a philosophy for living when you are in conflict with people on a day-to-day, when you are in conflict with one another? If our strongest testimony is the way that we love one another, then this is hugely important. So how do I move from theology to philosophy? When I want to resist and take up arms against my wife Amanda, right? How do I take this theology down? When I've been hurt by somebody because I hear they've been talking poorly about me behind my back. When I catch myself complaining about my neighbor's kids again and again and again, but have not talked to them about it. When I feel used by a boss or thrown under the bus by a colleague. How does this flesh out? And so let me just give you 2 very quick practical examples. And then we will finish up by taking and receiving communion, which, Jordan, you mind grabbing me one? I forgot to bring one up for myself. My kids are wonderful. They really are. If you know my children, they are good kids. But once in a while, they make some horrific decisions. And so, for example, and I got permission from Liam, my 15-year-old, to share this with you. I wouldn't do that without his permission. But the other day, I decided I was going to wake up at 5 a.m. and I was going to take Liam fishing in the Poconos. And so the night before, I tell my 15-year-old Liam, I'm like, get everything in the car. I mean, get our poles, our reels, our waders, our boots, our rods, vests, everything. Make sure they get in the car so that at 5 a.m. in the morning when it's still dark, we can slide out the house without waking Mama Bear, right? We can't do that. If we wake up any of these children or this dog and they stay awake at 5 a.m. and we leave that to my wife Amanda, we'll never go fishing again. So make sure we got everything ready so we don't have to make any noise and we'll slide out in the morning. And so in the morning, 5 a.m., we get up and we walk out the door and I look at Liam and I'm like, hey, Liam, did you get everything? He's like, yeah. I'm like, listen, man, did you, everything, like boots, reels, rods, vests, everything. He's like, yeah, I got it. Let's go, Dad. This is going to be awesome. So we drive 25 minutes to this river, to this brook. And I get out, I pop the trunk, and I go to get my boots, and they're not there. And I look at him, I'm like, where's my boots? He goes, where's your boots? I was like, no, really, where's my boots? He's like, I don't know, I put them here. I'm like, clearly you didn't, man. And at this point in time, I'm frustrated because now I know that's an additional 40 minutes of driving, which equates to $600 in gas. And once we get back there, if by chance we wake somebody up now that it's later, all hell is going to break loose in this home, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm frustrated. And Liam's doing all the right things, like he's apologizing on the way home, but I'm fuming. And I'm trying not to say anything, but I'm saying some stuff. Like it's only a few comments, but they're comments that for sure are not going to minimize the shame the dude's already experiencing, but it's gonna increase it. And so I blow it. And this is our temptation as parents. I'm going to move to a different example for non-parents in a second. But as parents, our temptation in these situations is to either respond with anger, punishing our children, right? Just getting frustrated and punishing, making them feel bad about their decisions, or being the nice parent and completely looking past it and not delivering any consequences at all. But here's the problem with Jesus. Jesus' truth doesn't lop on shame. If you look at the Gospels, Jesus' truth always sets people free. And Jesus' grace isn't some weird pseudo-niceness, right? Jesus' grace is the ability for God to come into the world and connect himself with us in a way that is empowering to us as human beings. Right? That's what Jesus' truth and grace looks like. And so instead, the third way for me and my kid could look like me as a father, seeing that there's no boots, taking a very, very, very deep breath, doing my very best to self-regulate my emotions, and getting in the car and with full empathy, and here's the trick, with full empathy going, bummer, man. Like, when we get home, you're going to have to give me that $15 for gas. Like, I'm really sorry. That stinks. I know you've been saving for something this next weekend, but you're going to have to give me that money for gas. And by some way, if we get back, I want to go fishing. You want to go fishing. But if some way one of those kids wakes up, you're unfortunately going to have to stay at home and watch one of your little siblings so that I don't have to wake up mom at 5:30, 5:45 a.m. I'm like, I'm really sorry, man. Totally different. That is a way of both truth and grace that I clearly missed this past week. But here's another example. Okay? How about when you hear through the grapevine that somebody is speaking poorly about you, talking behind your back? Recently, I'm speaking to somebody and they made some comments that alluded to an esteemed colleague of mine that is communicating some unfavorable things about me. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear that somebody might be talking badly about me when I'm not in the room, I'm tempted to either retaliate by talking poorly about them, right? I make myself feel better by elevating myself, tearing them down. Totally sinful, but that's my temptation. Or just ignore it and pretend like it's never happened, but you know the amount of insecurities and resent that will build up, especially the next time you see that person. But instead, the third way may look like me emailing that esteemed colleague of mine and saying, hey, Mike, I wanted to connect with you. So-and-so mentioned you the other day in our conversation, and I'd love to hear from you and even learn from you and see if I might have some blind spots that I'm not potentially aware of. Do you have time to talk? That's not retaliatory, nor is it passive. Instead, it's confronting the possibility of gossip, giving a person a second chance to speak directly to me, and potentially even learning myself in that process as I connect with them relationally as an act of grace again. The world says that we are either going to function in truth, right? I'm just going to tell you how it is. I'm just saying, which is not really truth, or we're going to function with grace, which is just some weird pseudo type of niceness. The world will tell you that our churches, our Mosaic churches, in this community here will either be a truth-telling church that just lets people know about their sin and whether or not they're going to heaven or going to hell, and that's it. Or we're going to be a grace-giving church which tells people, you know what, God loves you, you're accepted right where you are, forgetting that God meets us where we are, but longs to change us from the inside out. Right? And the third way says no. And so let me just end by reminding us collectively of our origins in the book of Genesis, where we have this narrative of Adam and Eve, where the first sin enters into the story in this narrative, where shame enters in as humanity wants to control and know everything about everything. They want to take God's position. And at this point that sin enters into the story, what it seems like is God has one of two options. In our duality, it seems like either one, God, you probably want to obliterate your creation that now wants to take your place, right? Just start over. You're God. This wasn't what you intended. Scrap this, breathe some life into somebody else. Let's retool this thing. Let's go with prototype B, right? You either obliterate or just turn a blind eye. It was stupid. Let's hope it doesn't happen again and just forget about it. Walk with them in the cool of the day. But this isn't what happens. Instead, from the beginning, in truth or grace, there is this third way where God goes, let me take on flesh and show you exactly how you are to live as a human. Let me take on flesh and show you the depth and height of my love. And I will take your sin and I'll take your shame and I'll take your guilt and I will use it I will use it to show you the depth of my love as I defeat death and rob the grave. Jesus is the third way. And when we put ourselves under the lordship and the leadership of Jesus on a day-to-day basis, kind of walking back to him going, nope, I don't want my way. I want yours, Jesus. I want to take you seriously. I want to not just believe in you, but I want to believe you today. When we place ourselves under the lordship and the leadership of Jesus, we start to embody this third way more and more, which is absolutely necessary for our testimony. The way we do conflict matters. In fact, our testimony may hang on the way we do conflict. Show me a church that doesn't do conflict well, and I will show you a neighborhood that will not miss that church when it's gone. But if we can figure this out in a multicultural, multi-ethnic way, we will be known by love, and the city of New York will continue to be reminded about a God that is good, alive, working, and for them.